father used to say that the quietest rooms hold the loudest secrets. I didn't understand that until the night of my wife's promotion party, when I stood in a crowded ballroom full of laughing people and realized I was completely alone. My name is Elliot. Wait, no. That name's taken. Let me start over the way this story actually starts. With me, standing in our kitchen at 6 in the morning, watching my wife straighten her blazer in the hallway mirror like she was preparing for battle. My name is Carson. Carson Webb. 41 years old, project manager for a mid-sized civil engineering firm outside of Columbus, Ohio. I drove a used Tacoma, coached youth soccer on weekends, and made my wife's coffee every morning for 9 years without being asked. Dark roast, 2 sugars, the mug with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away because she'd bought it in Prague before we met. Small details. The kind you collect when you love someone. Her name was Vivienne. Not Vivi, not V. She corrected people about it every time, with that tight smile that wasn't really a smile at all. She was a corporate attorney at a firm downtown, sharp in ways that used to make me proud, and eventually just made me tired. When we got married, we were equals. Somewhere around year 6, the scales tipped, and neither of us said anything about it. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I was not a perfect husband. I worked long hours. I forgot anniversaries twice. I went through a stretch of about 8 months where I was so buried in a highway overpass project that I was barely present even when I was physically in the room. I know my part. I've spent a long time sitting with it. But what she did, what I found out she had been doing, that's not something you earn by being distracted. That's a choice. A series of choices, made deliberately, over a very long time. The promotion party was her firm's idea. Senior partner, the youngest woman in the firm's history to make it, which was genuinely impressive, and I genuinely meant it when I told her so. They booked out a private event space downtown. The kind of place with exposed brick and bartenders who don't put ice in anything unless you ask twice. I wore the charcoal suit she picked out for me 2 Christmases ago. I got my hair cut that afternoon. I was trying. She barely spoke to me from the moment we walked in. At first I told myself it was nerves. She was being celebrated. She had colleagues to greet, clients to impress. I understood. I stood near the bar with a glass of bourbon I didn't really want, and made small talk with a paralegal named, I'm blanking on his name, something with a D. Didn't matter. I was watching my wife work the room the way she always did. That practiced ease. That laugh she turned on like a faucet. And then I noticed him. His name was Garrett Solis. I'd heard the name before. He was a senior partner at a rival firm, someone Vivienne had gone up against in a merger case 2 years back. Tall, late 40s, the kind of tan that comes from a boat, not a backyard. He was standing close to her, not inappropriately close, not at first. Just close in the way that people stand when they've decided proximity is acceptable, when they've decided it 100 times before. I watched her tilt her head toward him and laugh at something he said. A real laugh. The kind she didn't give me anymore. I told myself I was reading into it. I went and got another drink. Around 9 o'clock, I found myself near the back of the room by the coat check, feeling conspicuously like a man had been forgotten at his own wife's party. That's when a woman sat down on the bench beside me and said, without any introduction at all, "You look like you're doing the math." I turned. She was maybe 50. Silver hair cut short, sharp eyes that had seen things and filed them away neatly. She was holding a glass of red wine and looking at Vivienne and Garrett across the room with an expression I recognized as professional neutrality barely covering something else. "I'm sorry," I said. "The math," she repeated. "When you're standing at a party watching someone, and you're doing the math, adding up the small things, the little subtractions." She took a sip of wine. "I'm Heloise Wren, Garrett's wife." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Carson Webb," I finally offered. "Vivienne's husband." She nodded like she'd already known. "They worked together on a case last spring," she said, still looking across the room. "Did she mention that?" "She mentioned the case, not specifically working with him." "No," Heloise said. "I don't imagine she would." We sat there for a moment, in the particular silence of 2 people who have just confirmed something without saying it directly. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "I could be wrong," I said. I wasn't saying it to her. I was saying it to myself. "You could be," she said, "but you're not." She stood up, smoothed her dress, and looked at me with something I can only describe as weary compassion. "I've been where you're standing. I stayed. I don't recommend it." She picked up her clutch. "Get a lawyer before she does." That's the only advice I'll give you." She walked back into the crowd. I sat there for a long time after that. The party continued around me. Vivian gave a speech I didn't hear. People clapped. Someone made a toast. I held my glass and thought about Prague and the chipped mug and 9 years of dark roast coffee with 2 sugars, and tried to remember the last time she had looked at me the way she was looking at Garrett Solis across that room. I drove home alone. She said she'd catch a ride with colleagues. I said okay. I didn't ask which colleagues. I didn't sleep. I lay on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling and had the conversation with myself that I'd been half-having for probably 2 years. The one where you acknowledge what you already know but haven't been willing to call by its name. In the morning, she came home at 7:30 smelling like someone else's cologne and said she'd stayed at her friend Marisol's because it got late. I told her the coffee was fresh. She poured herself a mug, not the Prague mug, one of the new ones, and went upstairs to shower. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what Heloise Wren had told me. Get a lawyer before she does. I didn't fully understand what she meant until 3 weeks later when I found the folder. It was an accident, the way most catastrophic discoveries are. I was looking for our homeowner's insurance documents because the roof had started leaking above the guest room, and the contractor wanted policy numbers. The documents were supposed to be in the gray filing cabinet in our home office, third drawer down, behind the tax returns. They weren't there. What I found instead, tucked behind a hanging file labeled Miscellaneous, was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were documents from a law firm I didn't recognize. Not Vivienne's firm, a different one entirely, in a city 3 hours away. There were pages of financial disclosures, asset valuations, a property I'd never heard of in Asheville, North Carolina, listed under a name I didn't recognize but was clearly a shell company of some kind. I sat on the floor of our home office for a long time. Then I read every page twice. What those documents represented, as far as I could piece together, was the architecture of a planned departure. She'd been moving money. Not stealing from me exactly, it was a joint account, technically her money too, but restructuring, reclassifying, putting assets somewhere I wouldn't think to look, in forms I couldn't easily access, under entities that weren't obviously connected to her. She had been building a door that only she had the key to, and she'd been building it for at least 18 months. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I took photos of every page on my phone. Then I went downstairs and finished the roof insurance paperwork and called the contractor and made plans to fix the leak above the guest room. Normal. I had to keep everything normal. I called my brother-in-law, Terrence, my sister's husband, a man I trusted more than almost anyone I knew. He was a former CPA who now did financial consulting. I texted him that I needed help with something personal, met him for lunch at a diner out near his office, and slid my phone across the table with the photos pulled up. He scrolled through them without speaking. His face did something complicated. "How long have you had these?" he asked. 3 weeks. "And she doesn't know you found them?" "No." He was quiet again. He handed me back my phone. "Carson," he said carefully, "this looks like she's been preparing for a divorce for well over a year." "Yeah," I said. "I know. You need a family law attorney, not a friend who went to law school. A real one. Before she files." Heloise Wren's voice in my head, word for word. I called an attorney that afternoon. Her name was Patricia. Wait, she's on the list. Her name was Carla Stout. She had 17 years of family law experience, an office full of diplomas, and the particular kind of calm that people develop when they've sat across from a lot of desperate people and learned that calm is the most useful thing they can offer. I showed her the photos. She studied them for a long time. She asked me a series of very specific questions that I did my best to answer accurately. At the end of our first meeting, she leaned back in her chair and told me she needed 2 weeks to do some research, but that in her preliminary assessment, my wife had made several moves that crossed from strategic financial planning into territory that would not look good to a judge. She was getting ready to leave, I said. "It looks that way," Carla said, and she was making sure she'd leave with everything she could. Carla chose her words carefully. She was making sure the distribution would favor her, yes. I drove home that evening and made dinner and set the table for 2. Vivian came home an hour late, distracted, talking about a case. I listened. I asked the right questions. I poured her wine. I'd gotten very good at keeping my face still. I'm not going to describe the next 6 weeks in detail because honestly, some of it is still hard to think about without feeling that particular sick mix of grief and fury that doesn't have a clean name. What I'll say is that Carla built a case quietly and thoroughly. What I'll say is that Terrence helped me document the financial trail in a way that was both legitimate and airtight. What I'll say is that Heloise Wren, who I found on LinkedIn and messaged with a single carefully worded note, responded within an hour and offered to provide a corroborating timeline if it ever became legally useful. She had stayed, she'd said. She didn't recommend it. She'd been building her own case against Garrett for different reasons. A business fraud claim that intersected, it turned out, with some of the same financial maneuvers Vivian had used because they had apparently coordinated their approach through the same obscure private wealth consultant. 2 spouses, 2 infidelities, 1 advisor helping both of them hide assets from the people they'd promised to build lives with. When Carla presented that connection to Vivian's attorney in a pre-filing meeting I wasn't present for, I'm told the room went very quiet. She asked me for a divorce on a Tuesday in March. She sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd had coffee every morning for 9 years, and told me that she'd been unhappy for a long time, that she'd tried, that she hoped we could be civil about this, that she had spoken to an attorney. She had a folder of her own. She slid it across the table to me. I looked at it. I didn't open it. "I know about Asheville," I said. Her expression shifted in a way that told me everything. Not guilt exactly. Something more calculated. A recalibration, like she was pulling up a different document in her mind and scanning it fast. "Carson, I know about the LLC. I know about the account at the wealth management firm in Charlotte. I know about Garrett." I paused. "His wife says hello." She was silent for a long time. "My attorney will be in touch with yours," I said. I pushed the folder back across the table without opening it. I stood up. I took the Prague mug off the shelf, the one with the chipped handle, and I rinsed it in the sink. Then I put it in a moving box I'd already started in the garage. That detail matters to me still. Not the mug itself. The fact that I knew, in that moment, exactly which things were mine. The divorce took 4 months. It was not clean exactly, but it was thorough. Carla did what she said she would do, and the concealed assets were surfaced and factored into the settlement in a way that was considerably more favorable to me than Vivian had planned for. The Asheville property was included in the marital estate. The Charlotte account was included in the marital estate. The Charlotte account was included. The wealth consultant lost 2 clients in the same week, and I heard through Terrence that he was facing an inquiry of his own, though I didn't follow up on the details because I'd decided at some point to stop pulling threads that didn't belong to my story anymore. I sold my share of the house. I kept the Tacoma. I kept the Prague mug. I moved into a 2-bedroom rental in a part of Columbus I'd always liked but never lived in, with a big front porch and a neighbor who has a yellow lab that visits me sometimes through a gap in the fence. My sister called me 3 weeks after the final papers were signed. She asked me how I was doing. I said I was okay. She said, "That's not what I asked." So I told her the truth, which is that I was somewhere between relieved and gutted, and that both feelings were completely real, and that I hadn't figured out yet how to hold them at the same time. "You will," she said. She was right. You do. I coach soccer on Saturday mornings still. 8-year-olds mostly, who are less interested in strategy than in arguing about who gets to wear the penny with the number 7. I drive the Tacoma to the field, and I drink bad coffee from a thermos, and I watch these kids run, and I think, sometimes, about what I thought my life was going to look like at 41, and how little it resembles the picture I had. But I also think about something Heloise Wren said to me in a follow-up message, months after everything had settled. She had finalized her own proceedings by then, her own separate story of what she'd found and what she'd done about it. She said, "I spent so long grieving the version of my life I thought I was protecting. I forgot to ask whether that version had been real for a long time." That landed somewhere important. I've been thinking about it ever since. I don't have a tidy lesson to offer. I don't have a morning where I woke up and felt completely fine. What I have is this: the quiet kind of clarity you get when you stop carrying something that was never actually yours to carry. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who stopped listening years ago. My father said the quietest rooms hold the loudest secrets. He was right, but they also hold the loudest possibilities. Once you finally let the noise out. I wish I'd opened my eyes sooner. I wish I'd opened my eyes sooner. I wish a lot of things, but mostly on the good days, and there are more good days now. I'm just glad that Heloise Wren sat down next to me on that bench and told me the truth before I lost any more time. If you're in a room that feels too quiet, and you already know why, trust what you know. Trust it before she does. I've thought a lot about the word trap since all of this ended. Not the kind someone sets deliberately for you, The Rivian did set one in her way. I mean, the kind you walk into slowly over years, because you keep choosing comfort over clarity, because acknowledging what you already know costs something, and it's easier to keep paying the smaller daily price of not knowing. That's what I did for a long time. I saw the signs, the distance, the distraction, the laugh she saved for other rooms. I filed them away somewhere I didn't have to look at them. I told myself that marriages go through seasons, that closeness comes and goes, that I was probably projecting. I was very good at giving her the benefit of a doubt she had quietly stopped earning. What changed wasn't that I got smarter. What changed was that a stranger sat down next to me on a bench and told me the truth without being asked. Heloise didn't owe me anything. She had her own grief to carry, her own version of the same story playing out across the same room. But she looked at me and recognized something, the particular stillness of a person doing the mask they've been avoiding. And she said what she said anyway. That's the thing about people who've already been through the fire. They know what the smoke smells like before you do. I think about what my life would look like if I hadn't listened. If I told myself she was wrong, or bitter, or projecting her own situation onto mine, I would have gone home that night and kept making coffee and coaching soccer and slowly disappearing into a version of my life that was already being dismantled around me. Vivian had been building her exit for 18 months. If I'd filed first or understood the situation 3 months later, the financial picture would have looked very different. Not catastrophically different, maybe, but enough. Enough to matter. Here's what I actually believe. Stripped of any framework I was taught, actions compound. What you choose to do or not do accumulates. Vivian made a series of small choices over a long time, each one a little further from honest, and they built into something that couldn't be walked back. The lying wasn't just about the affair. It was in the hidden account, the shell company, the carefully managed performance of a marriage she'd already decided to leave. That's not a single bad decision. That's a pattern of choices made daily that eventually becomes who you are. And on my end, I made choices too. I chose inattention for too long. I chose the easier interpretation when the harder one was sitting right there. I'm not saying I deserved what she did. I'm saying that staying awake in your own life is not optional. It's the most important work there is. What I found on the other side of all of it, the lawyer, the 4 months, the rental with the yellow lab next door, was something I didn't expect. Not happiness exactly. More like solidity. The feeling of standing on ground that is actually yours. Carson Webb, 41 years old, used Tacoma Prague mug. Still here, still paying attention now. If you're in a quiet room and you already know why it's quiet, don't wait for someone else to sit down next to you. Trust what you know, and then do something about it while you still have time.